I see some familiar faces in joining us. It's so nice to see you. Is that Ayana? Oh, hello.
Hi, how's it going?
Good, how are you doing?
So good. This is exciting.
Glad you could be here.
Thank you. I love this.
If folks have any trouble as we're going along, there is a chat feature that you can use, and we'll show you a little bit more about that in a second. We're going to give folks just another couple of minutes to join us, because this is new technology for some. But if anybody wants to unmute for a second and say hello, please feel free.
Hi, I'm Jen. I'm friends with Kate Miller-Corcoran, and she had invited me to this Facebook workshop because I have a lot of questions for her about gardening, because I see her awesome garden, so I want to be like her.
We all want to be like Kate Miller-Corcoran. She's amazing.
Right.
That's how it starts. Then she's going to want you to make a hamburger out of beets.
He's already offered some compost.
How did you like your beet burgers, Matt?
I'm not going to say that I was the best at preparing it, so it wasn't perfect.
We tried something new, and that's what's important, isn't it?
Right.
I see Amy Shapiro joined us. Amy, you're gardening this year?
Possibly.
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 Well, we're here to help.
It's about time.
Amy, I can relate, okay? I can relate to you on that. It's about time.
I gardened once, 30 years ago, when right around the time you were born, if not before, right?
No, I was born. Yep. But definitely, I've pretty much only grown like one tomato in a pot before, and from seed. That's about it.
Wow. Let's
Thank
see.
you.
Well, we'll be hanging around the house these days, so might as well make something of it. That was my thought.
That's been a lifelong dream.
Not really.
So this is Catherine and Conrad, and we're thinking about gardening on our back deck for the first time.
Oh, that's exciting. How are you?
Hi, Catherine.
Hi, Amy.
Hi, Amy.
Hi, Matt.
Christina and Jabril are here with me behind the scenes. We're all 6 feet apart, being very safe, social distancing, but they're my tech folks. How are things going? Do things look good on your ends? Should we get started?
I think that's a great idea, Amelia. Thank you for leading us through all of this.
Yeah. Yep. All right, I guess we're going to go ahead and get started. So I'll have folks mute again, just so there's not background noise that can sometimes interfere with the audio. But you can send questions through the chat window. I'll take some pauses and invite people to unmute to ask a question as we go. But first, welcome. This is our first gardening live workshop. We were really sad to not be able to offer our 101 workshops in person this year, but I think that this is a really good way for us to reach some folks that don't always have the flexibility to get to our workshops. So this will be recorded and put on our website, so you can access this at any time. And we're going to be doing more of these kinds of live workshops as we go and get things figured out. So I'm Amelia LaDolce. I'm the executive director of Vines. I grew up on a farm myself, so I've been gardening since I was a kid. But I still learn new things every year. And so I hope that regardless of what level you're at, how much experience you have, there's plenty to learn from each other, everyone on this webinar. So, well, we'll go right into it. First, a little bit about Vines. So we started back in 2007, and our mission is to create a sustainable and just food system. We do that through a number of different programs that make it possible for people of all incomes and backgrounds to get access to local food, whether that be through gardening at our community gardens, which we have 18 around the city of Binghamton, around the Broome County at this point, Binghamton, JC, Endicott, and Vestal. Here's a map of all of our sites. We have over 400 garden beds at this point. We also have our farm share program, which is a food subscription program. So you sign up and then you get a box of fresh, locally grown veggies every week during the growing season. And applications just opened up for that. Everything is on our website, vinesgardens.org. We also have these free workshops throughout the year. This past year we held about 30. We're aiming for that this year. Obviously, with everything that's going on, we're figuring out new formats to get education to y'all. And at our urban farm, which is where we are here today, we have 2 acres of urban farmland in downtown Binghamton. At this location, we grow food that goes out to folks through our farm share program. We also donate to Binghamton Food Rescue, Chow, and other folks that get food out to people for free. We grow the food here with the help of youth employees who work with us in the summer. And they learn everything from seed starting, planting, harvesting, distributing food. They earn a paycheck through the process and gain a lot of really valuable job and life skills. So just to touch base real quick on some housekeeping things. So if you're joining us via Facebook Live, you don't have to worry about muting yourself. That's for folks who are here on Zoom with us. If you can't see yourself in the meeting via Zoom, click the Start Video icon at the bottom right of the screen, and please mute your mic if you haven't already done so. I want to thank Christina and Jabril for doing all the troubleshooting to make this possible and allowing us to do this live at our urban farm. And if you haven't already made a donation to Vines, we do welcome donations. They are not necessary to be a part of our workshops, but they allow us to keep our workshops open and free to the public. So please feel free to make a donation if you haven't already. We will provide opportunities as we go for questions, and then we'll also have plenty of time at the end. And at the end, please do complete our survey for the workshop. It gives us valuable information we need to improve our workshops. Yes, Christina is going to send out a poll in the chat window, right? So you should see that come up in the chat window, or if you're on Facebook, it's in the comments.
It will be in the comments in a second.
It will be in the comments in a second. So we want to see how much experience you have gardening, just to see where folks are at. It's like a pretty good mix of experience, but a lot of folks with none. It's getting sunny in this greenhouse. All right, awesome. So about 50% of our folks have no experience, and then others have a little bit, and some of you have quite a bit. So I really value all of your experience and ideas to share with some of our newer folks, because I'm still always learning, right? I imagine you all can understand that too as more experienced gardeners. All right, so here's what we're gonna cover today. We're gonna talk about how to get started. If you don't know where you're gardening, we'll talk about that. We're going to focus on using a square foot gardening method, which allows you to get the most out of your garden bed, and also just make it very simple for yourself in planning out your space. Talk a little bit about maintenance and tips and tricks. And the second half, you're going to start planning out your garden beds. So you should have received a packet if you registered online, this packet which has our PowerPoint, but then as you go further into it, we have some educational materials for you, and then also a grid that you can use to design your own garden bed. If you haven't received that, go right to our website and register, and then Christina will add the link to register in the chat box. So you can go ahead and register, and then we'll email this over to you. All right, so some options for you. Where are you gonna grow? Raised beds at home are a great option. Community gardens, you can use containers at home. You could grow right in ground at home. Some things that you want to consider are soil testing. So if you live in a city or on a property where your home was built prior to 1970, you likely had lead paint on your house at some point, and over time that falls off of your house into the soil. So you don't want to be gardening in ground if you are in a city environment or a house that's older without testing your soil. And the soil closer to your house is more likely to have a higher lead contamination rate than the soil further away from your house. So those are some things to consider. Lead obviously is not something we want to be consuming, especially if you have kids at home. We did provide in the registration information a link to UMass Amherst, which you can get soil testing through for pretty affordable. You also want to think about sun and shade. You want 6 full hours of sun per day. And you can go outside now and try to figure that out. But there's one thing that might kind of trick you this time of year. The trees don't have leaves on them yet. So a spot in your yard that might be really sunny right now, once your trees leaf out, that could change. So you want to take that into consideration as well. If you don't have a sunny spot to garden, you can garden in a shadier spot, but you're not going to be able to grow things like tomatoes that really need a lot of sun. So it might be more ideal for lettuce, spinach, leafy greens, things that are okay with a little bit of shade. Also make sure that the site you pick is accessible to your water source. So if you pick a spot that's 200 feet away from your house where you have a water spigot, you're gonna need at least a 200-foot hose, right? And that can be a little bit difficult. So think about these kinds of things. And then finally, pests and disease. If you have deer roaming around your house, you're gonna need to do some pretty significant fortification in order to garden without a lot of disappointment. So if you do have a lot of deer pressure at your house, you might consider going to a community garden that is properly fenced. But if you have the means to, put in a garden where you've got deer and build a 10-foot fence, go for it. The other thing that you often have to think about are cats and woodchucks. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later. But if your home has a lot of these issues, you may want to choose a community garden location. So here's some examples of the types of growing you could do. You could grow in ground or in a raised bed, like the picture in the upper left. That's our Laurel Ave community garden. If you have deer, this is an example of a tall deer fence. Deer can jump very high. But you can do a lot in containers, just in 5-gallon buckets on your patio. And there are some tips and tricks to be successful there. But now I want to see where people are thinking about gardening this year. So Christina and Jabril are going to throw up some polls for us on that so it can get some more info on what you're doing. And if folks want to unmute for a second and ask some questions about your specific locations, please feel free.
So I have a question. We actually pulled out some annual plants on the side of our deck, and now I'm thinking of getting that soil tested because it's very, very close to the house, right offside of the deck. But do the plants, does it matter, like, I guess, the depth of soil On the side, I'm asking because I believe like more than probably, I'd say 9 inches down, there was like a rock patio at some point. So I don't know if that would be something to think about. And then my second question is, I'm thinking of putting in a butterfly garden that I've always wanted to do in our back, where I did have a raised bed, but was pretty shaded because we have a huge tree in our yard. But with that butterfly garden, can I plant vegetables amongst the flowers?
Yes, you can definitely plant vegetables amongst your flowers. That can be really cool looking and pretty, and a neat way to, you know, add texture to your decorative beds. So you can definitely do that. Next to your deck, 9 inches is deep enough to grow a lot of things. You know, if it starts to get really rocky even before that 9 inches, if you're growing carrots, they're going to start splitting in all kinds of interesting ways, and, you know, but you can still grow a pretty decent sized carrot at that depth. Potatoes you probably aren't going to grow, but things like tomatoes, lettuce, spinach, they'd be fine in that kind of depth. So it looks like we've got a number of folks doing community gardens, at home raised beds, in containers, and just a few folks growing directly in the ground at home. Now, if you are growing at home, but you want to build a raised bed, we did send out with the materials for the workshop a raised bed design that's very easy to build. It does cost around $250 or so per bed, but it is much easier on your back, and you have a lot less weeding to do, because when you're growing right in ground, all the stuff from your yard can creep right in. When you build raised beds, the weeds have a harder time getting in. Anybody have any other questions?
Yes.
How far away from the road should a garden bed be?
Well, if you're using a raised bed, you don't have as much concern. My major concern would be salt. You don't want to get salt in your bed just because it's going to kill everything. But the things that come out of car exhausts, like nitrogen oxide, carbon monoxide, those really aren't going to hurt your plants. They're not going to, they're not things that would be harmful for you to ingest. They're mostly vapors, and then some particulates from tires. You know, when we go over the road with our tires, little bits of tire come off and go into the air. If you need to garden in your front yard, I wouldn't be concerned about that, as long as you've done some soil testing or are bringing in clean soil and raised beds.
Hi, this is Conrad.
Hi, Conrad.
Hi. We're thinking about doing gardening on our back deck in an elevated container. Now the deck has what do you call it, railing around it, but it's only railing that's like 4 or 5 feet high. Would this keep deer off? I mean, what are the chances of the deer going to jump the railing and wind up on the back deck?
Have you ever seen deer come onto your back deck before?
We never have, no.
Then you might be okay. Deer don't love being like super close to people. And so they usually, you know, they're not going to get that close to human space unless they're just really hungry. Trying to think of what you could do. I mean, even if you just moved your plants along the side of the house versus the railing, that might be a better option. But I guess the worst that could happen is you try it and you have a little bit of failure. But I will.
Right.
I mean, it's unfortunate, but you learn. Every season you're going to fail somehow, and you're going to learn from that, and the next season's going to be better.
Right.
Deer don't love tomatoes, tomato plants. Every so often you'll get a deer eating some tomato plants, but if you're growing some tomatoes along the edge of the railing, they're probably not going to eat those. So you could also work with some things that they don't like as much. Things like green bean plants and cucumbers, they might be a little bit more likely to eat those. Leafy greens, they'll eat those. So
All right, thanks. Thank you.
A little bit. Yeah.
Hi, isn't there some flowers that you can plant too that deer? Is it marigolds? I'm not sure if I'm.
Deer don't love stinky plants, which is one of the reasons that tomato plants usually do pretty good. I have not had success planting things that they don't like to keep them away. You can get things like coyote urine and things like that at the hardware store, and spray those around spray that around the perimeter. You have to spray that every time after it rains because it washes right away. But that's something you could try doing. Christine, do you have any other tips on deer?
I mean, sometimes like eggshell kind of stuff that you might be scaring away your other visitors too. You might not want to.
Yeah, there are things that can scare away deer.
They don't like noises, like people will actually put like tape or something around that whistles.
Yep, you can put noisemakers up around things that when the wind blows through it makes noises.
The jump fence method, right? They don't want to jump their vision.
So I'll repeat a little bit from Christina because I'm not sure everybody could hear from where she is. And man, it's getting warm in here today. What's it on the thermostat, Jabril? You see it? It's 84 degrees in here right now. So another method for keeping deer out, if you don't want to have a tall 10-foot fence, you can do it's called a double fence. 2 fences right next to each other about 5 feet apart that are only about 4 or 5 feet tall. Deer have bad depth perception and they don't want to jump over that. I've also had luck. I lived in a place with a ton of deer pressure. I put up an 8-foot fence attached to my house, and it was close enough that they didn't want to jump over that, even though they can jump over 8 feet like it's nothing. So that worked for me.
We have some questions from the chat box.
All right, we've got some questions from the chat box. I'm going to have Christina read some for me.
Hey, so we have a question.
Hold on.
Yes, hi. I'm going to be doing a combination of container gardening, and I have I'm on a community garden. Are there plants that are better suited for container gardening than an open garden plot?
Yes, I recommend using containers for herbs and leafy greens. If you need to, you can grow tomatoes in them, but tomatoes they're heavy feeders and they want a lot of water. So if you're growing in a container, the things you have to think about are, can you water every single day? And can you add some fertilizer? Because you don't have a lot of soil there. So you can get things that are organic fertilizers like a fish meal emulsion, bone meal, things like that. There's also a lot of vegan, non-animal product fertilizers out there, but you need to water those every day, otherwise you're not going to have happy tomato plants. So if you go with something simple, I like to use containers for lettuce mixes so that I don't have to like reach into my garden bed and do the weeding. It's just I actually use grow bags for those, in these nifty like heavy duty fabric bags, and you can move them around, and I'll just sprinkle my lettuce mix all over the top and I'll get a couple harvests out of that, and I don't have to deal with weeds in those as much. So those are good options.
Thank you.
Okay, we have a question from Jennifer Chudachik. Mute your computer. Hit the no volume sound, the no volume button. It's okay.
No, it's not Amelia's. This
is from Jennifer Chudachik from our chat box. If we have some smaller garden beds bought at Lowe's, can we use the same soil from last summer? To be more specific, the location was on the deck. Personally, I think it's absolutely fine to keep on reusing soil from year to year as long as you are observant of any kinds of pests or diseases that you might have observed in your plants. It's also a really good idea to refresh the soil. So keep that soil that's in there, but keep on layering in organic material or adding finished compost every single year. Just generally speaking, if you want to plant some kind of cover crop or lay down some mulch before the fall, you're going to have that much richer soil come springtime. But it's absolutely should be fine as long as that soil came from a good place. If you saw some kind of anthracnose or some other kind of diseases attacking your plants, you might want to solarize that soil, cover it with plastic, put it in the sun for a few weeks, and basically kill any kind of bacteria that you might not want in there. But if it's only a year old, that soil is probably just fine. Right, Amelia? Good. Thank you for your question. We have another question from Vicky. Speaking of animals, how about woodchucks? Oh, you want me to take it? I can take it. Go ahead.
All right, woodchucks. So I like to, with the raised beds, it's really easy to add some fencing right around that raised bed and staple it all along the bottom and along the posts, and then the woodchucks can't get in. And I really like to use a plastic fencing that will bounce back after I kind of, bend into, get into the garden, and I push it down. I can push it down and reach in, and then when I stand up, it's going to bounce back, whereas like chicken wire, every time you bend it, it's going to keep bending. It's not going to bounce back. Lowe's has some, and Home Depot has some. It's like that orange snow fencing that you'll see, but it's actually green, so it's a little bit nicer to look at. So that's a good option. I'm going to move forward, and then we'll come back to questions. All right. So if you're here in the Broome County area, we're in Zone 5B. Binghamton is Zone 5B. In the outer areas, we might be a 5A or a 6. But what this means is that we're in an area where our last frost date is somewhere in early to mid-May. Typically, folks will say you're safe to plant your tomatoes by Memorial Day weekend. And then we're going to get a first frost in October. So that determines what things will grow well here. Things like sweet potatoes have a very long growing season. To get a nice sweet potato, you need to be planting that earlier than you can do here in Binghamton. Or you can try to cheat it and use some black plastic. There's things you can try to do, but they're just things that you can't grow. So you'll want to be getting gardening information for Zone 5B when you are looking up information. Get your seeds early. This year, there is a huge demand for seeds. People want to grow food. We're all concerned about the food supply, and we want to be able to take back some control and also do something that's good for our mental health. So there are a lot of seed companies that are selling out of things. So go ahead and just try to get seeds as soon as possible, so before things start to run out. And you're going to start simple and small this year, especially those of you who haven't gardened before. I recommend picking 5 things that you want to plant. Go with easy things, master those, add something new the next year. Don't be too ambitious. Because then you have less risk of failure and you can take it easy, and it doesn't have to be a stressful endeavor for you. Only plant what you want to eat. Radishes are one of the easiest things that you can plant and grow. If you don't really like radishes, what's the point, right? And things that are going to be important for your success are fertility and compost. Compost is the best way to add fertility to your soil in an organic way and a low-cost way. You can get compost from Agway. You can get compost from a horse farm that has composted manure. A lot of times they're fine having you come load up a trunk full. I mean, we do that for vines. We have some horse farms that'll let us go and just shovel stuff into the back of a truck. So these are things I recommend that you consider to start and be successful. Let's see here. The square foot gardening method. I wanna talk about this just a little bit, and we're gonna get into depth more, and also talk about some other topics. But the thing that I really want to encourage folks to use as a gardening method, if you're a beginner, is the square foot gardening method. It is simple. You're going to maximize production in a small space, and there's going to be a lot less weeding for you. I use the square foot garden method myself. I don't weed my garden bed more than once or twice a year. Once things get established, the weeds just don't have space to come up, and they're getting shaded out by your food crops. And the reason why this works better than just following the directions on a seed packet is that you are growing based on human scale and not machine scale. So seed packets will tell you, space out your plants X inches apart. And that's important if you're using a hoe or a wheeled hoe or any kind of other mechanized tools to weed. If you're growing in a raised bed and you're using the square foot garden method, you can just use your hand or small hand tools. And in a raised bed, you're not walking on your soil and compacting it. So the soil should be very loose, and it should be very easy to just pluck a weed right out of the ground. So with this method, you literally make a grid on your garden, and then you're going to plant according to that grid and some of the materials we're going to provide you. So you will plant a certain number of plants per square using this method. And the materials that we have for you have outlined all of these different crops and how many you can put in each square foot. So a cabbage is going to take 1 entire square foot. Carrots, you can get 16 per square foot. And as these get bigger, they're filling up that space very well and outcompeting weeds. It's also a really helpful tool because it helps you plan for growth. When you pick up your tomato seedling at the store or at the nursery, it's this big, and it's going to get this big. But when you're a beginning gardener, I mean, you don't necessarily know what the size of a mature plant is. And the square foot gardening really will help you prevent overcrowding, but also maximize the space so you can get as much in as possible. So there are some really great examples in the materials we've provided of simple, easy to grow gardens and how you space everything out. Okay. Once you have decided where you're going to grow, before you can do this, you need to determine what size of your bed is north or south. And the reason for that is you want to plant your shorter size plants on the south side and your tallest on the north side, because the sun comes from the south. If you have your tall plants on the south side, it's going to shade out everything north of it. So you want to, so on this you can see it's marked where north is, and then they've planned to have their taller things up here. So that is something that you'll do before you actually start drawing this out. We've got a planning chart for you where you're going to write out the crops that you'd like to grow. And while this planning chart has a lot of different rows on it, so you could put 20 plants on that planning chart, I do recommend beginners start with 5 things just to make life easier on yourself. So you're going to start writing those things down, and then you're going to add some information into that planning chart so it's all right there and easy for you to get to. So you know when you need to plant it, about what time, like how long it's going to be until you harvest it, how much space you need, how tall it's going to be, can it deal with some shade. All of these things are going to help you figure out your gardening season in a digestible way. The seed information chart we provided in the packet gives you that information by plant. Something to note is if you have some old seed packets, your seeds may not be good anymore. So a nice thing that the seed information chart has is the number of years the seeds are good in storage. So at a certain point, seeds may not germinate well for you, and every species of plant is just a little bit different. Onions only last a year, but melon seeds and cucumbers can be 5 to 10 years until the seeds go bad. There are easy ways you can test germination at home, but if you can use this as a guide, and if you have stuff that's really old, it might be worth just getting some new stuff. There's a lot of information on a seed packet, and while we're not going to recommend that you use their spacing guide, I do recommend the square foot gardening. There is a lot of information on there. How much sun the plant needs, number of days until maturity, because there are early tomatoes that have a shorter growing season than some others. So you want to look at your seed packet to get some details. All right, so mapping out your garden, you're going to do your planning chart and start writing that out. You're going to think through how many plants can you fit per square, and then you're going to start planning and drawing out where you're going to grow on a grid. We do have in your packet, we have this. If you haven't received our packet, again, just go register and we'll send it to you. But if you didn't have this, just take a piece of paper and draw yourself a grid. I couldn't find my ruler at home. So I just took a piece of cardboard, made a little tick mark here to equal 1 square foot. And I just, drew myself a box, used this little tick mark to make 1 foot marks, and made a grid. It's not like perfect, but unless you have OCD, you probably can handle this, right? So that's a very simple way you could do things. Let's see. So what do y'all think? Does anybody have any opinions on what some of the easiest things are to grow? And I'm going to go ahead and let you unmute yourself and offer some ideas, especially those of you who are more experienced. Offer some advice to some of our newer folks.
So I'm growing peas, arugula. Can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I already put in peas, arugula, because they're cold weather crops, peas, arugula, kale, and a longer thing I put in, I don't know if it's going to make it or not, I put in some beets. And we'll see what happens. You're right, I didn't understand about sweet potatoes last year. The sweet potatoes never made it. And I think I got one. Oh, and I'm also starting inside my basil. Mm-hmm. So I'm growing basil from seed, but inside putting it on my kitchen window.
Yeah. A lot of those things you mentioned, Elliot, are things that are very easy to grow directly, without starting them at home. I did.
Which is great. No, the peas and all of those things, they're in my plot.
Right.
At the garden.
Yep.
And what I did last winter is I put straw over everything for the winter. And so when I went over there, the soil is in really great shape. I kind of just fluffed it up a little bit. And because it's still cold outside, at one end I have some straw, which I put down over the seedlings to keep them warm because I know we're going to have some cold nights.
It's a great idea. Beets, super simple, and they grow so well in this environment. Kale is also a great one. Those are a lot of good things to try starting with. How about anybody else?
I have some cold weather plants into, like Elliot, in the ground outside actually. My first year trying to be intentional of a spring, summer, and hopefully a fall garden so I can get the most bang for my buck. But this is my first year expanding to that. Typically I just do the typical summer garden stuff. I actually planted yesterday some red cabbage plants. What else is out there? Romaine lettuce, and then I have some spinach out in the ground. I covered it last night with just a piece of plastic that I just had laying around the house because I know it's been chilly at night, so I'm concerned about frost. Mm-hmm. Kind of gonna see what happens though.
everything's just kind of an experiment, right? Until you know what works. And then some years it's still an experiment because things change every year weather-wise, so.
How do we know how many, so going back to like your carrot example versus the cabbage in 1 square foot, you might have already touched on this, but how do we know how many of each thing, like you said, 16 carrots and 116 in 1 square foot. So how do we know how many plants in each square foot?
Yep. So the, hold on. Okay. I'm learning how to, relearning how to use a Mac. So I'm trying to figure out how to go backwards in the slides. Oh wait, there it is now. Okay. So in your packet, geez. Hey, Christina.
What's up?
How do I get rid of this little notification that says you don't have permission to use the application?
I'm going to say 6 feet behind you. You don't have, just click, okay.
It doesn't want to go away.
Allow once.
Allow once. It doesn't want to go away. I'm gonna try to just throw it away in the corner.
I don't know what that is.
All right, there we go. So in the seed information chart, it has the spacing, so the number of plants per square foot. And if you look up if the thing you want to grow is not on this seed information chart, if you look up square foot gardening on the internet, you'll be able to find that. This has a lot of the common things though. So you'll look to this chart, which is in your packet.
Awesome, thank you.
Yeah.
So when you say, when it says like this spacing out the plants per square feet, are we talking about the seeds? Like from seeds?
Yep, so from seed or if you're transplanting. So if you've got a tomato plant that you've already got from the store, and it says tomatoes are, I think they're actually, what is it, 4? You need about 4 squares per tomato. There are ways that you can squish them together a little bit more. We can talk about that. But so you're going to take and put 1 tomato plant in these 4 square feet. If you're doing, say, beans, and it says 9 per, you're going to go 1. I can't do this in the air. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So you're going to do 9 like that. And in your packet, we have this really great example that shows you spacing and for a number of different crops. So, once you get down to here, the different plants that need 1 square foot each are peppers, collards, eggplant, kale, broccoli, cabbage. Things that are 9 per are beans, onions, arugula, spinach, and so on. So you could even just kind of take this and pick one of these plants per row that you want to do and just steal this chart. Be done and just say, okay, this is what I'm doing.
And so you would just stick, like if it was beans again, and I'm sorry because I can't look at the Zoom and the chart that I downloaded or the info I downloaded. But it would be in the center of the 9 squares, in other words, right?
So if you are, if you put 1 plant in a square foot, you put it right in that center of the square foot.
Of the 9 squares.
So let's take a tomato plant, let's take a cabbage. You need 1 square foot for a cabbage. Right. You're gonna go and you're gonna map out your grid on your garden, and you're just gonna take 1 of those squares, and in the center you'll put your cabbage.
Right.
If it's more, if you're gonna do beans, then you just make a little grid and kind of give them an even distance in that square. So I make, for when you need, we put 9 plants in per square, I do 3 rows of 3.
Makes sense.
So I'm going to pull up an example. Oh. We'll wait for the computer to catch up with us. Nope. Sorry. Technology. Okay. I figured out where we need to go. Aha, okay. So in your packet or in the PowerPoint slides, slide number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Slide number 9 has an example of this for you. Okay. All right, I'm gonna go on to.
I have a quick question.
Yeah.
So is it like just one seed per, like this may be stupid, but I've never gardened before, so like.
Christina,
like,
don't call yourself stupid.
So like kale, the one that is one of the ones that needs just one plant per square foot. So then would you just plant one seed? Or is it a number of seeds depending on the plant?
That's a great question. And I'm going to give you a terrible answer, which is it depends.
Okay.
So there are some plants that you're going to plant a little bit thicker and you're going to thin them out. Things like carrots and lettuce, you're going to plant a little bit more dense, and then you're going to go through beets as well. And once they start popping up, you're going to look and you're going to find the best, healthiest, strongest, biggest looking ones, and you're going to keep those, and you're going to take the other ones out around them until you get to those 9 per square. And the reason is because things with smaller seeds, you might have a lower germination rate, so you need to plant a little bit extra to get to where you want to be. Whereas things like peas, they have a much higher germination rate, I think just because the seed is so much bigger, it's got a lot more nutrients to get it going. And so you can get away with just putting 1 or 2 and then per area where you want them to be, and you could thin that out. But it's a good question because it does lead us to a couple other important topics. Transplants versus starting and doing direct seed. So when do you want to, for the plant you're going to grow, do you want to go and buy a baby plant that's already started, has an advantage getting started versus putting a seed directly in the ground? Transplants, I recommend that you purchase transplants, aka seedlings, baby plants, whatever you want to call them, for things that produce a fruit. And that's not just fruit in terms of how we, what we call a fruit dietarily versus a vegetable. I mean anything that creates a fruiting body that then you eat, like a tomato, a zucchini, things like that. Hold on, Christina's computer is telling me to do something, but I'm gonna ignore it, it's fine. You can start your own seeds. We're gonna do some education on that probably in the next couple of weeks. But if you're just getting started, make things easy on yourself, buy some transplants or grow a lot of things that you can direct seed into the ground. So things that are roots, beans, lettuces, typically you can plant right into the ground. Here's some more information for you on that. Things with large seeds, you tend to be able to put...
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
So one of the things that bothers me is that, you have some of these great seeds and they're little seeds, and I do thin them out. But, for my little garden, I kind of plant, it's not like I can save them. So I'm kind of laying them all out. And I mean, last year in my garden, I gave people stuff that germinated because I can't, what do you do with extra seeds? You have to give it away. All of us are buying a lot more seeds than we need to do whatever we want. Should we be have a pile someplace in all our gardens that somebody else can go grow with them? Because I can't use all those seeds.
I think that's a great idea. And you could, at your community garden, there's a toolbox that you could put them in and put them in a Ziploc bag until it gets warm. That's a safe place for them. Once it starts to get hot, those seeds could get destroyed by the heat inside. But absolutely, talk to the other site coordinators, talk to Charisse and Rabbi Brown and tell them this is what you're going to do, and then they can get that out to the entire group and let people know they can help themselves to those seeds. That's a great idea.
Okay.
And we do have a lot of free seeds at the office. We can go in, if you let us know what you need, we can mail some out to you. So large seeds, beans, peas, zucchini, cucumbers, those tend to do much better going right into the ground. Things that have tap roots, so things that are root crops that go down, carrots, beets, they don't love to be started and then moved. They don't like their root being disturbed as much. So those are better to put right into the ground. Things that you want to transplant only, tomatoes, peppers, pumpkins, eggplant, you won't be successful if you stick an eggplant seed in the ground in May. There's not enough time for it. So those things that are more tropical plants, the long season crops, you need to get a seedling to start with. We will have a lot of seedlings available for folks. We often get a lot of donations from nurseries in the area, and so we make them available to our gardeners and other folks who can't afford to buy them. Direct seed, things that are decent at direct seeding, things like spinach, kale, cauliflower, collards, herbs, cilantro. I mean, you can't kill cilantro. Like, it keeps going and going. Some of the things in the cabbage family that you might have a little bit of trouble with in direct seeding, though, is that if you're in the city of Binghamton or somewhere else where there's a lot of flea beetles, they will eat up those little baby plants in a heartbeat. So, and you'll know that that's what's going on because everything will just turn into lace. So I typically start kale and collards indoors and then bring them out once they are a little bit stronger. But something to combat that flea beetle issue is put lots of marigolds in your bed. So this is a guide you could use to help you figure out, what do I start indoors? What do I direct seed? The easiest thing, one of the easiest things to grow is green beans. I highly recommend growing some green beans. In terms of the value of what you can produce at home versus what you can buy in the grocery store is great with green beans. And they're just so delicious, fresh garden green beans, right? People always talk about how good fresh tomatoes are, but I think people don't give green beans enough credit.
Hi, could I interject with a question or two?
Please.
Yeah, let's see. I was wondering about leaf compost that the towns sell. Is that good compost?
It is. Yeah, and you can even take if you have leaves that you are taken from your backyard
Right.
at the end of the season, put them in your garden bed. Leaves have a lot of really good life going on in them when they're decomposing, so they can bring a lot of life to your bed.
And my second question is about lima beans. How well do lima beans grow in this area?
I am not a lima bean grower, but I know they grow well in this area.
Oh, okay, great.
Is that correct? Does anybody know differently?
I've never grown lima beans.
Our farmer was just talking about lima beans and how much he loves fresh lima beans, and I think he grows them at home.
All right, thank you very much.
Yeah.
Last year in my garden, I didn't do lima beans, but I did a version of pole beans and green beans, and they went crazy. I had really good luck with them. So,
did you try freezing them at all, or did you just eat them all?
Ate them, gave them away, but I should have froze them. I didn't have to venture into canning and freezing, and
yeah,
something else I need to start.
Well, green beans, again, I guess I'll just keep talking about green beans, but they're one of the easiest things to freeze because all you have to do is blanch them for 3 minutes in hot water, put them in ice, dry them off, put them in a plastic Ziploc, and they'll be good all winter. Much easier to preserve than a lot of other things. So just a tip. All right, I'm going to go into planting. We'll come back to some more questions. So once you have drawn out your bed, you're going to actually go and create this grid on the space that you're actually growing in. And you can just take some string and staples or some nails and map that all out. And you're gonna follow the information we've given you on where to plant them in the squares. Something that's really helpful to know as you're starting to plant is, you know, if you don't have a ruler, you always have your hand, right? So I have used rulers to measure my hand to know that the width between my pinky and my thumb is about 7.5, 8 inches, which is really convenient. A lot of things are supposed to be planted about 8 inches apart, so I can just put my hand on the ground and know where to put things. My thumb is about 1 inch, so I know this is 1 inch. So, you know, figure that out. It's a helpful tool when you go to plant. So, and then when you've got your grid out, you're gonna, remember, if you're gonna direct seed some things, you might plant a little extra and thin it out. So take out things later once they pop up. You're gonna take out some of the smaller, weaker looking plants to get to your proper spacing. Don't forget to label what you planted where. I'm sure that anybody who's gardened has not labeled before because you think you're going to remember, and then you're not sure what you put where. So take popsicle stick, plastic knives, cut up, you know, a yogurt container, write on it, make a little stick. And after you get your seeds in the ground or your transplants, make sure you water them. You can't just stick them in the ground. They're going to need water immediately, and if you want to be successful, get them that water immediately, and then keep watering them pretty well those next couple of days as they get established. Things that climb and your tall plants are going to need some support, so we're going to talk about that now. Trellising. There are lots of ways you can trellis stuff. You can just get some stakes, some wooden stakes, and some twine, and wrap it around and let things crawl up of that. You can take some sticks from your backyard and create a trellis that way. Some wire, you can take some stakes and some wire and just put those together and you're good to go. Has anybody used some strange trellising tools that have worked well?
I've used old wooden ladders.
Ah.
It's kind of cool. You can paint them, decorate them, and put them in your garden.
Yeah.
I found that, you know, there's tomato hoops, because in a small garden, they're round. I put the tomato hoop right in the middle of, say, wherever, you know, however, I might not do my peas and say in a straight line. I make a circle, and then what I'll do is as they grow up, I just tie them on to that existing metal piece. Mm-hmm. And it just kind of overtakes that, and that makes, I don't have to lay out a long, I can portion my space in a better way.
Yes. Yeah, you can buy the tomato cages where you know, there's all kinds of things you could do. You could take, I've seen people just take whatever random things they have in their garage, like an old broomstick that isn't attached to a broom anymore, stick that in the ground with some other things, and you can make it work with, you know, just stuff you have laying around, and you can make it look cool, like the ladders. That's a really nice idea. But you definitely, like things like tomatoes, cucumbers, climbing beans, peas, they need some support. And it also allows you to maximize your space more. So if instead of letting your cucumbers just grow along the entire bed and start, like, they'll start choking things out, if you have them, a trellis for them, they'll grow up and you can put so much more in your garden bed. So these, the guidelines we've given you for square foot gardening, if they are climber plants, they will only, you can only put a tomato in the amount of space they outline in this guide if you're giving them support to grow up. Otherwise, they're going to grow out and around and take over the entire bed, and you won't have as much space for other things.
I'll make a comment about tomatoes. You know, the only reason they grow out is that you got to remember that if you take off the suckers as tomato plant, then the tomato plant will grow up. If you don't remember to take off the suckers, then it's going to spread wide.
Yeah, there's a lot of tips for tomatoes, and I think we might actually make that one of the subjects of one of our online workshops, because there's just so much to learn about tomatoes. And we'll have some tomatoes going into our hoop house in the next couple of weeks. And then we'll have tomato plants that we can use as an example way before your tomatoes are gonna probably even be, you know, more than like this tall in your gardens. So we'll do some more on that. Fencing is something else, you know, to really think about and figure out what you're going to do for your garden, especially if you have those pest issues. We did talk a bit about this already in the lower right-hand side of the slide. You can see that green fencing I was talking about. You can staple it right to that bottom of your raised bed, and that will keep all the critters from getting up in there. We talked a little about thinning your crops. It's okay. This is a healthy thing to do. You can see in this picture that we have things planted very close together. And those in the top corner of that bed, there are, it looks like beets. And you're never gonna get a good sized beet if they're planted that close together. It's okay to let them grow up to that, you know, that kind of height, what you see in the picture. Probably, you know, a good like 5-6 inches or a little bit less, and then start thinning them out so they have room to grow. Some other tips, think about succession planting. So I'm gonna plug green beans again. If you've like taken out your spinach for the spring or some other crop and now you have some space, throw in something that grows quick and easy, like green beans, baby lettuce, leaf lettuce. I do a couple of different plantings of basil throughout the summer. Those are good things that you can do easily. And at the end of the summer, when your tomatoes are starting to die down, you can throw in some spinach, and that will be happy in the fall in the cold weather. Kale and collards are also happy in the cold weather. So you can do some later plantings of those when you have some empty space. If you have an empty space in your bed, you can just throw something in it that has a shorter season, so you get the most out of your bed.
Amelia,
yeah.
Is it worth it in a small garden, which I've done it, but whether you advise it, is that I put in garlic.
Mm-hmm.
And by putting in garlic is perennial, but I don't want to pick the garlic. What I want is I have actually I don't have the garlic where I am now, but next to my house, I have garlic, and I keep it in there because I want the early shoots, which are really very good, almost not even like green onions, delicious in eggs.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'm waiting for the skate.
Mm-hmm.
And then I make garlic skates. I make garlic pesto.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, and then I also have parsley, because also parsley is perennial.
Yes. And
I'm pretty sure my parsley is going to come back in the Deerfield garden, and whether or not you advise that.
Oh yeah, sure, why not?
Okay.
You know, there's a lot of things that will come back if you cover them properly. Parsley, if it's not covered, parsley is going to die out over the winter. Things like thyme and oregano will also come back if you cover them with some leaves or some straw to protect them from the cold.
Okay.
One really important thing I want to tell folks, because you know, you don't know until you find this out. You really, when you water your plants, water the base of the plants, water the soil. Don't water your leaves, water the soil. And the reason being, especially with things like tomatoes, zucchini, and other squashes, is the diseases that kill them are fungal based. And they're floating around in the air all the time. They're just there. And they settle on things. And something that is wet, when that fungus falls on it, it just sucks right on. So if you want to prevent late blight on your tomatoes and other things, don't water the leaves. Don't spray your water across your plants like this. And also start to explore some companion planting and trap crops. So you can plant marigolds and different herbs around to keep away pests. Apparently radishes will also help with flea beetles. And if you have like a lot of Japanese beetles that attack your garden, try planting something that they really like away from your garden and try to get them to go to that space. I'm just gonna go through, I think we're actually at the end-ish. So I wanna give folks time to plan their gardens.
I have a question.
And ask questions as well. So yeah, go ahead.
The herbs you mentioned about planting to avoid insects, what herbs would be best?
Oh, what herbs are best? I think dill is a good one. It's pretty stinky and a lot of pests don't like them. I always have major issues with flea beetles, so I always put in marigolds, and they're just pretty, right? So that's really helpful. It kind of depends on your pest. We did put in the informational packet a guide on companion planting. You know, these are things that will help out each other. There are some plants that they say can compete with each other. You're not supposed to put your dill with your carrots. I don't know the reason behind that. I don't know what's behind that, but there are some things that, you know, they say that about. So I like to put my basil with my tomatoes because I think basil often gets eaten by Japanese beetles. And I think the stinkiness of the tomato plants keeps them away from the basil. And also then by the time the tomatoes are getting big, I kind of plant my tomatoes and basil. Sorry, something slammed in here. So I'll plant like a tomato and then a basil plant, a tomato and a basil plant. And once these tomatoes get big, there's not enough room for that basil plant, but that's at the time when the basil plant is ready and I'm taking it out and making pesto and freezing it. But that helps with the Japanese beetles. So sometimes other plants actually help the herbs. All right, so we can just like keep it open for questions. You can also start, you know, trying to map some things out if you'd like. I know that over like a webinar, it doesn't make as much sense to sit here all together and do this. Yeah. In a big room together, it's kind of nice. You talk with your neighbor and you try to figure things out, and we walk around the room and help people plan. So I guess, you know, just figure out how this best works. If folks want to just keep asking questions, you can. If you want to try drawing some things out and then show it on your screen, that's also really good.
I have a question.
Yeah.
It seems like in this area we have so much humidity. I get problems with my garden plants with like the powdery mildew. And I love cucumbers and I love zucchini. What do you suggest how to control that?
Hold on, I'm gonna let Christina talk on this one. Let me mute myself.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, I hope you got the email okay. So what we would do back in Ethiopia is that we do a 1 part milk, 10 parts water solution and do a foliar spray maybe twice a week. This is research out of Brazil where they found that the probiotic properties of the milk and water solution actually deterred the powdery mildew more than any of the commercial fungicides available. So again,
I love that.
Milk, or you know.
Yeah, that's great because it's non-toxic.
Water, mix it together and spray. So that's something that worked well for us.
Okay, thank you.
I have a question as well. So like in the packet it says obviously that there's companion planting like you said, and there's some like that are just not compatible with each other. Does that mean that you can't plant them?
Sorry, I lost you for a second. I was trying to figure out my volume. Can you repeat that, Christina?
Oh yeah, sorry. So in the packet, the Gardening 101 packet, it talks about the companion planting.
Christina Fuller, sorry. I lost you. I had my mute on. I thought I was increasing the volume.
I think she's muted.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Now I can hear you, sorry.
Okay. So in the Gardening 101 packet, there's like the companion plants, and it says like what plants shouldn't be planted together. Does that mean that they shouldn't be planted in the same raised bed, or just not right next to each other?
Just not right next to each other.
Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Are there any questions in the chats, Jabril or Christina, that you want to read?
I've been responding to
Okay.
some of the questions just to, if you want me to share.
Yeah, why don't we, I'm gonna mute myself and we'll have Christina.
Okay. So we had some great questions, and if you've been following the chat window, I've been trying to respond, just because Amelia's been handling all the conversation questions so well. We had a question from Jennifer Chudachik about can vegetables be grown with seeds from veggies we're eating now? For example, from the grocery store. Biggest recommendation, and of course Amelia might have other opinions too, but in terms of like tomatoes, peppers, dried beans, you can definitely grow those from seed. Stuff like squash or pumpkin, they're not going to come true to seed, so they might wind up looking, they're not going to come out looking like their parent plant. So I wouldn't recommend that. Potatoes and sweet potatoes, you can chop those up whenever you see those eyes, or potatoes, anytime you see those eyes coming out, chop them up, put them in front of a fan for a day, and then try planting those out. But it also depends on how those plants were processed after they came to the supermarket. So if your yams have been waxed, for example, or if the potatoes were sprayed with some kind of fungicide, they might not grow as healthily. I mean, right now you have the time to experiment, see what works. It's a wonderful project, especially if you have young people in your home, to figure out all the different things you can grow. Amelia, you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I'm going to add to that. So when you have a tomato, for example, those seeds are very easy to save and then plant, but you do have to do some things to make that possible. So for example, tomatoes, you need to like squeeze all the seeds out, put them in a cup, let them start to ferment a little bit, and that will take all the goo off of the seeds, which would, you know, otherwise if you don't get that off, they're just gonna rot. So to dry them, you do that fermentation, you stick them in a cup, give them a couple of days, and then you rinse it out and you get all of that goo off of them, and you stick them on like a paper plate or something paper that will wick away the moisture, and then you've got a seed that you can save and replant. But most things you can't just take right out of the seed, out of the food and stick it in the ground. Everything's a little different, and there's a lot of cool things to learn. And like Christina said, if you want to experiment, go for it. But there's also a lot of great information on the internet that'll help you.
One of the things I want to add, if you decide to do squash, which I did last year, I love kubacha squash. And I got kubacha squash seeds because the skin is edible. So when you bake it in the oven, you don't have to scoop it out. You can eat the whole thing. But you have to understand that it can take over not only your garden, it takes over everybody around you's garden, because as the little flowers grow, which by the way, the flowers are edible, but as those little squashes grow, it's already over 4 gardens over. So you have these vines. And that's also true with pumpkins. So you have to discuss with your neighbor that you're going to have invasion of squash vines. And so I'm not so sure. I mean, I want to do that again, but I'm going to plant only 1 plant, not more.
What are some other space hogs that people have grown only to realize later they took over everything?
I mean, even the zucchini, you have to mound it up, and the zucchini can take over too.
Yeah, and unless you're feeding an army, you don't need more than 1 zucchini plant.
Can I ask a question?
Please.
Yeah. When is a safe time to start planting in a raised garden bed in this area?
So I've already got stuff planted in my bed, in my raised bed. The nice thing about raised beds is that the soil warms up more quickly than the ground. And seeds, in order to germinate, the soil needs to be a certain temperature. It's a little different for each crop. But I put peas and spinach in the ground already. They don't mind the cold weather, and they germinate at a cooler soil temp. So you can get those in the ground now. But things like tomatoes, I wouldn't put them in until Memorial Day. Unless you're like, if you're planting in your backyard and there's going to be a cold night and it's easy to just run out and put a bed sheet over them or something like that to protect them from frost or cold, that's great. If you're planting in a community garden that's a couple blocks away from your house, and when you realize at 8 o'clock and you're in your comfy clothes, like it's going to be a cold night, are you going to run out and cover your stuff? Maybe not. So for those kinds of things, you're going to want to wait. But I'm going to double check. I know that, so on our seed information chart that we provided in our packet, they have ideal soil temperature. So this gives you a general idea of how cold it can be when you plant these things. So parsley can deal with a little bit more cold soil temp. And I think there's also, is the glare? Oh, thanks. Sorry, I can't see myself, so I can't tell when you guys aren't seeing this. So, so if you look at this column, that gives you some of an idea. And also, there's a lot of guides out there. I don't think we have one in here, but there's a lot of graphs showing when you plant certain crops. It is a lot of information for us to try to give it all to you at once, but if you aren't finding a good resource, just email us at info@vinesgardens.org and we'll send you some more materials. And maybe Christina can look up one of those planting charts. Do you know what I'm talking about? And put it in the chat.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Are there any seeds that we should be starting inside now?
So things that you would need to start indoors to transplant: tomatoes, peppers, eggplant. But if this is your first year gardening, I'd recommend maybe not doing that and just buying the transplants. Things that are pretty easy to start indoors are things like kale and collards. But there are a lot of tips and tricks that you need to learn to be successful growing indoors. You need a lot of direct light for plants to be happy. Otherwise, what's going to happen is they're going to get what we call leggy. So they're going to be, draw an example. So you'll wind up getting this little seedling. Is this in the shot? Yeah. That is really skinny and has the true leaves at the top. Those are, your cotyledon leaves. Those are the first that come out. And it's going to get so heavy that it's just going to go flop. And it can't hold itself up. So if you're going to garden or you're going to start seeds indoors, you're going to need to have the right setup, and it can get a little expensive. Unless you just have to have that perfect window or a sunroom that has, greenhouse type windows. But let's face it, folks, we're in Binghamton. How many sunny days do we have with 100% direct sun? You need to put lights on top of your plants for them to be happy. And if you don't have the space for that, if you've got cats and you don't have a safe place to keep your plants away from the cats, they're going to get into it and it's just going to be a whole thing. We do plan on doing a seed starting workshop online in the next couple of weeks. I think that'll be the next one we do. So if you've got time and you want to experiment, then go for it. If you want to make life a little less stressful, the world's really stressful right now, maybe wait to start seedlings indoors.
Hey, Amelia.
We will have transplants available for folks. Yeah, next question.
You mentioned that you already planted some beans as well as did you cover those already, or you just planted them and let them uncovered?
Is that Tamika?
Yes.
I put my peas and my spinach in the ground, but I didn't cover them.
Okay.
They can tolerate the cold. If we were gonna get like, if they were already popping up out of the ground and we were gonna get a whole bunch of snow, I'd probably put something over them.
Okay.
But they haven't even popped up yet. They kind of like take their time to come up. So if you plant them a couple of weeks early, they're just gonna hang out in the soil till the temp's right, and then they're gonna come up when they're ready.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Well, one question we have for folks is, what other topics would you like us to cover? We've talked about seed starting, caring for tomatoes. Those are two things. Anything else?
I actually had a question. I posted this in the chat, but some other people might want to know the difference between like bush beans and cucumbers. So last year, because the reason we took our raised bed out is because we built it almost 10 years ago and it was falling apart. So I got some bush veggies like beans and cucumbers. And the beans, I put them in a garden box on the deck in full sun, and they still climbed up the deck poles. So, and I actually didn't get beans in the box. I got them off of the poles. Only a few grew. And then the cucumbers that I grew, I put in ground, and I got like softball, size cucumbers from the bush, and it really didn't work out too well. So how do I tell the difference if the seeds are bush beans, cucumbers, or climbers?
They really should be labeled, but every so often there's a mix-up, right? And I just wonder if you had a seed packet that said that they were bush beans, but they were actually climbers. That might have happened to you.
Okay. Are climbers the best ones?
I like the bush beans. They're just easier. They're prolific. They grow quickly. The climbers are really pretty, and a lot of people like to use them to just add some texture and beauty. You can create like a teepee in your backyard with sticks and let them grow up around it. And then your kids can have this cool little hiding spot to go in underneath the green bean or the bean plants, which is cool. Bush cucumbers, I've actually never really experimented with them too much. I always get the climbers. There are some varieties that as you garden more, you'll start to recognize the variety name, and there are some varieties that are just really kind of tried and true. Provider green beans are a really good green bean to go with. Market More cucumbers, I'm trying to think of some others. Champion collard greens, those are all just like really trusted varieties that you'll have success with. When you look through a seed catalog, they do tend to give you some details on, this is a great, easy starter variety for folks, no pest issues, things like that. So, read through those catalogs and see what the descriptions are to help you pick.
Okay.
Yeah.
So if you did do the TP idea, which I've seen is adorable, what do you recommend for birds?
I haven't had birds get in my beans, but that doesn't mean it doesn't happen. Do you?
Jump in. We definitely had issues with birds attacking our cucumbers and beans down in New York City, and getting some netting that you can put kind of over can definitely create a barrier so that way the birds can't get in there and peck at that stuff. Some people spray with like a chili pepper and water solution.
Okay.
Used.
Awesome. Thank you.
I know we didn't talk too much detail about container gardening, so I do want to offer some more tips because I know at least Catherine and Conrad are going to do that. I recommend that when you put together your soil mix for those containers, that you just do a little bit of internet research. You need things in that soil mix that are going to help retain moisture so that your plants aren't dying, because on a really hot day, that 5-gallon bucket is going to go dry like nothing. So putting in some perlite or vermiculite is great. And also you're going to go through a lot of nutrients, especially if you're growing tomatoes in. So there are, there are things, like I said, that you can add to it initially and then also supplement with as the plants are growing to replace those nutrients. You want to think about drainage. So you want to have holes on the bottom of your container so that if you get a heavy rainfall, the water has somewhere to go and it's not rotting out the roots of the plant. And you can even put, on the bottom of the bucket, you drill your holes and then put, some stones or wood chips to help keep the soil from just going out the bottom. And I'll be right back. I'm going to grab something to show you. This is a grow bag. Am I in the right shot?
Yeah, you're good.
Okay. So these are made out of just a heavy fabric, and you fill them up with soil. The water is going to go right through this, to hold in what the soil needs, but this drains really well. And these are really nice and portable. What I like about these versus using a 5-gallon bucket is that this is a breathable fabric. And what it will do is it will air prune the roots of your plants. So if you plant in a 5-gallon bucket, you're gonna have your roots going around and around and around and around that bucket. And they can really, just weaken a plant. Roots, when they come in contact with air, the air is getting, the oxygen is getting thicker, they will self-prune. So they'll stop growing as they reach the air, and that will just keep a healthier plant. So you can get these online for pretty reasonable and use them for many years. I've had these last me like 5-10 years. So it's a good investment. And it's really nice to just, I'll plant my leaf lettuce in here. And if it's a really hot day, lettuce doesn't like the heat, I'll pick it up and I'll move it into the shade. So.
Do you think we could make them ourselves?
Do you plant the soil in those right up to the top?
Yep, put them right up to the top. And when you're building a garden bed or filling a container, something to note is that soil will settle. So you'll have about 7% loss in height. So if you plant, 10 inches of soil, it's going to settle down to 7 inches. So you top it off pretty good and it's going to settle down.
What do you do in the winter with your grow bags? With my container pots, I just leave them out on my deck. Do you leave those grow bags out in the winter?
Yeah, you can leave this out. I wouldn't leave this in general. I wouldn't put this on a wooden surface because it will collect moisture underneath and you could rot your deck board or just at least, be growing some mold that you don't really like. So if you're gonna put it on your deck, maybe find something that you can rest it on, like a plastic base for a big planter, just to protect the surface underneath.
Do you have to cover, in the winter, do you have to cover the bag with a tarp?
No.
Or it just will sit? Okay, great.
It'll just sit there. The difference is with container gardening versus growing in a bigger planting area is that you can lose the life in it. So if you've got this over the winter or a plastic bucket over the winter, it gets so much colder. The whole thing is going to freeze and all the life in there is going to die. Whereas in a raised bed or you're growing in ground, when the ground freezes or the soil freezes, it's not freezing really all the way through. So all of that bacteria and other, the microbiome, it's alive, and that helps keep your plants healthy. So I would typically change out the soil in my containers every year and try to bring some life into it. And if you have some compost bins at home, that's a great source of microbiology to introduce to these containers. Other things you can do is even just have a leaf pile, in an area. You can shred your leaves. There's all kinds of things you can do. And then the leaf mold they call it when you compost leaves, you can throw some of that in there and introduce some life too. You can use compost teas and things as well. Okay. I know we're at 1:30. We dedicated an hour and a half to this, but I'm happy to keep answering questions if folks have more questions.
I have a quick question. What do we do with the dirt from last year's container?
If you have some flower beds, you know, or a spot in your yard, you can spread it out. I would do that. You could also, you know, take some of that soil and repot your house plants with it.
And what soil do you suggest to buy for the containers?
Well, there's so many philosophies on this. What I have done, and it just depends on what resources you have available to you. I have used compost from my compost bin, some store-bought soil. I go for the organic stuff, and then I add vermiculite or perlite. And sometimes I'll add a little bit of peat moss, just to lighten it up a little bit and help retain more moisture. But there's a lot of recipes you can find online for this. I think, you know, I had created a container gardening guide using these garden bags, and I've got to pull it back out. I think we might try to use it this year and promote it for folks, because a lot of people want to grow from home, and it can be difficult to build a raised bed at your house or grow in ground. So I think, you know, we're going to look into promoting these, and I'll dig that up. And what we can do is send that out. Okay, I'm going to mute myself and let Christina ask some of the chat questions.
No, I was just sharing that a number of people have expressed interest in composting workshops, fertilizer, or I guess soil amendment workshops, and then several people are asking about fruit trees and berries, and several people are expressing they would love to have a class, how to prepare 5-gallon buckets to use for tomatoes, etc., with visuals. So it sounds like you're on the right track. Of course, if anybody has any additional questions or ideas, please email us at info@vinesgardens.org with any ideas for topics. And there is an exit poll that I'll email a link. You should have, if you received the email, you can fill out the poll, and that's where you can share any additional feedback you might have for us. And we're going to use your feedback to help us make better programming in the future. Amelia, is there anything else you want to share?
Yeah, I just want to thank you all for being here. We had such a great turnout. I'm seeing we have like over 70 people on Zoom, like a lot of people here today. And, you know, some folks that have been chiming in and asking questions like are familiar people that I love a lot, and so good to hear your voices. And some of you I don't know yet, but I'm so glad we got to spend some time together. At the risk of getting sappy, you know, it's just a hard time, but I think doing this kind of stuff can keep us sane and bring a lot of joy to our lives. So we're going to do everything we can to make that possible for you this growing season, and I really look forward to talking to you more over the coming weeks. All right. Well,
thank you.
Yeah, if anybody wants to unmute and say goodbye so we can hear each other's voices, please do.
Bye. Thanks.
Bye, everyone.
Bye. Have a great day.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, thank you. And I'm sending you the poll right now. Please fill it out. Thank you.
Right. Let's stop the share.
Ooh, that got big. Okay.
Oh. Mm-hmm.